Hey guys, this is Mike Mahaffey, the old bastard BJJ guy, here for BJJ Mental Models. Back in my day, we had to walk uphill in the snow both ways to get to the academy just to learn some crappy technique from a random purple belt. You kids have it so easy because now you can just subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium and get tons of great audio courses to learn new techniques, enhance your mindset, and entertain yourself. You can even get personalized rolling reviews from some of your favorite BJJ Mental Models coaches, including me. It's like having your own seminar, you spoiled little whippersnappers. So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium right now, get off my lawn, and go train.
Hey, welcome to BJJ Mental Models, episode 303. I'm Steve Kwan. BJJ Mental Models is your guide to a conceptual and intelligent jiu-jitsu approach. And today, I'm here with longtime friend, black belt, and community member, David Bayarena. David, sir, how is it going?
Very good. How are you, Steve?
I am doing well, sir. You know what's funny? As of this recording, it is my birthday, so happy birthday to me.
Oh, wonderful. Happy birthday.
Now, you know what you could get me for my birthday, David?
Talk to me.
I could use about an hour of financial planning advice in the context of jiu-jitsu. Do you think we can do that here today?
I'm going to do my best.
Okay, well, before we dig into that, David, quick introductions. Tell everyone about your jiu-jitsu journey, who you are, the kind of work that you do. Let's set the table.
Sure thing. So my name's David Bayarena. I have been training jiu-jitsu since about 2005, if my memory serves me correctly. So I'm getting close to the 20-year mark. Happy to say that I obtained my black belt a few years ago, and I'm currently training under Jordan Hawley here in Victoria, Texas. He is a black belt, and he owns the Holy Grail.
That is a cool name for a gym.
It is.
I am constantly impressed with people and their fancy gym names. I mean, so many people go with something like, Wildcat Martial Arts, or my favorite is Apex Martial Arts. There's about 800 Apexes out there, but I've seen a lot of cool names recently, like the Jiu-Jitsu Company or the Jiu-Jitsu Institute, but the Holy Grail, that's a pretty sweet one.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I've been training at this school for the past 3 years now, I think I'm coming up on, and it's been fun. It's definitely been my strong introduction into close to 100% no-gi, which was fascinating, right? First bunch of years was predominantly gi related, and it's been a lot of fun coming into the modern jiu-jitsu game.
You know what's funny is I have never liked playing gi specific stuff, but I like having gi specific stuff played against me. So I have this weird game where I train almost exclusively in the gi, but I really don't do many techniques that require the gi at all. I don't play a lot of collar, sleeve, lapel stuff, just because my interest in jiu-jitsu has always stemmed from self-defense, and I'm kind of skeptical of things where I'm not sure there's going to be a handle to grab onto. But I do like the feeling of danger that comes with wearing the kimono, where people can just grab onto you and attack you from anywhere. I feel like it really helps me keep alert and keep my defenses sharp. So I train primarily in the gi, but without doing any gi specific stuff. It's strange.
Nice. I enjoy it, and sometimes I think I'm missing it. We train like once a week in the gi, but then I go to class and I'm like, no, I'm good.
It's a lifestyle and health question, right? Do you want to live your life with destroyed fingers, or do you want to live your life with destroyed knees? That's basically the gi, no gi debate right there.
There you go. I agree.
Now, here's my question for you, David. When you take off the pajamas and you enter the real world to deal with the normies who don't understand the joys of jiu-jitsu, what do you do? How do you pay the bills?
Yeah, I've been paying the bills. Out of college now for 25 years, and I'm a certified financial planner. I'm also an accredited investment fiduciary. So I think all things finance for our clients. So I have a brick and mortar business here in Victoria, Texas called Kaizen Wealth Planning. And we also have a tax planning firm named Kaizen Tax Planning. And then specifically, we launched RONIN Wealth back in 2020 when everybody had a lot of time to think at home. And we started RONIN Wealth, which is really our niche offering for financial planning for martial artists and specifically the jiu-jitsu community.
So this is kind of what kicked off this episode. Is I'm really fascinated at the idea of a wealth and financial planning firm that specifically targets people in the jiu-jitsu space. Tell me a little bit more about that, kind of what led you to this road and what the problems are and the need for this kind of thing that you see within the jiu-jitsu space.
Yeah, definitely. There's always room for improvement, and there's always time to basically complain about one situation, right? And so we're looking at the industry for a long, long period of time up until 2020, having time on my hands. And, and the industry always talks about aspiring from a financial planning standpoint or a business financial planning standpoint, aspiring to working with people that you want to work with and really identifying this base of people. And so, but the reality is that we start out in the business and we're trying to do our very best and learning all the skill set of finance and helping people along. And so it's just really anybody who wants to talk to you for a long period of time until you take a stand on, or maybe identify who you want to work with. And so I said, I'm just going to take this to the nth degree and say, you know what, it would be nice to work with martial artists. And, there's something about them that I really, really understand. And maybe it's philosophical, so we don't have to get too deep into that. I'm not sure that I'm well versed in all the areas of philosophy as it pertains to that. But there is a big hunch that's associated with financial planning broadly and learning the entire skill set, as opposed to the way the industry is typically formulated in just managing money and working with individuals who have a ton of money, So that was the main idea of Ronin Wealth, is this, that I want to make it a practice such that what would the practice look like if I was most attracted to it, or I wanted to work with this particular practice. And so there's a lot of things to be said, Steve, about things that are jumbling up in my head, like behavioral finance, and really identifying what moves the needle on the wealth accumulation front for an individual, their business, and so on. And it has a lot to do with behavior. So as I started thinking about the martial artist and kind of the foundational value system that they stand on, I think that they may be very well, I guess the thesis we could say of Ronin Wealth is that martial artists are the best suited for financial planning and building wealth. And that's what I'm kind of out there looking and trying to discover if that is the case. So far, I'm very pleased with the people that I do work with, and it's working out well.
It's funny that you bring that up, because a big part of why I started BJJ Mental Models was this realization that at a conceptual and a strategic and a tactical level, there's actually a lot in common between business and martial arts. And I used to be that guy who would look at all of these business execs reading The Art of War and think, you guys are a bunch of idiots, right? You're a bunch of cosplaying samurai. But the more I get into it, the more I realize, they're completely different applications, of course, but a lot of the ways that we make good decisions, the strategies behind that are basically the same or similar no matter what you do. And that's kind of part of why I kicked off this project, is to help draw attention to those similarities. So it's interesting that you found similarities in your walk of life as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And oftentimes I think, well, goodness, man, maybe it's true. I'm an absolute nerd maybe when it comes to this, because I can't help but be obsessed about the overlap and what we see there. And as I stated, it's just really that foundational value, if you will. In my mind, it starts with, like, maybe we could say owning the space in which we stand. So the martial artist in my mind, the martial artist in me kind of thinks like that. At the very least, at the end of the day, can I own something, and can I own the space in which I stand? And from that point on, I also think, well, I have to respect the threats that are out there, the chaos that exists. And if that's the case, maybe I'm going to make a commitment to training, and also take a word from how I named the traditional practice. Kaizen is just training in a manner of Kaizen, right? And of continuous improvement. If you have that commitment, that seems to be the template that, I find myself training alongside with in the jiu-jitsu gym. And I think that right there is what is needed in order to bridge the behavioral gaps that we find in wealth accumulation, preservation, and distribution strategies to take us all the way in a successful manner. I think everybody tries to express their overall vision in some sense of financial freedom. And so I think it's interesting that it starts with ownership and wanting to own something. And so, yeah, that's kind of the launching point of that behavioral gap. I think martial artists, and I could speak more about the behavioral gap and what the industry has identified as a major, major problem in building wealth and being properly aligned along those lines. But I think that's the thesis, and we're going to stand by it, that martial artists are poised for that. There's still a lot of work to be done, right? For any individual who walks in and is just starting out, but they're starting out from a really, really great place.
Well, before we get into the meat and potatoes of this conversation, David, I just want to kind of talk to the audience for a second about the backstory behind this episode. I think a lot of people are going to listen to this. They might have already tuned out by now because they might be thinking, bro, I just come here to learn arm bars. I don't need someone to lecture me about finances or whatever. But I will say this. I have seen over the years a lot of friends of mine who had a lot of things going for them when they started setting up their jiu-jitsu business, but they didn't plan for the kinds of things that could go wrong. And they wound up losing everything. You talked earlier about 2020, right? The pandemic was a great example of just a completely unforeseen incident that can just tank your business. And of course, with inflation going up as well, a lot of people have been heavily impacted by that. And it always saddens me to see people losing their gyms or losing their businesses. I actually asked on social media a while ago what kind of content people would want us to make. And one of the things people said is, look, I lost everything. I lost my gym. I would love to know, how do I rebound from this? And I thought a conversation like this would be a good one. So if anyone out there is listening to this and you either are a jiu-jitsu business owner or there is a tiny percentage of you that would love to become one day, I think this is definitely going to be a conversation worth hearing. I mean, we're not going to talk about how to do inside heel hooks today, but we will talk about how to plan financially. I mean, there's only so much detail we can get into here, but maybe we can give kind of a broad strokes introduction to some of the ideas that people need to think about. And maybe we can drop some nuggets from your experience that might help people with common problems that they've encountered. So if that sounds good, David, what do you think? Good chat? Good topic?
Sounds great. Yeah. We'll do our best.
Okay. Well, before we get any farther, you talked about that gap. Let's explain that. I would love to hear more about this theory that you have about kind of the gap between how people think they make money and how they actually do.
Yeah, certainly. So what we found is when I first started out, there was no behavioral finance classes, number one. And this was in the late 90s. And I don't know when they came into vogue exactly, but they certainly are available now for students to start learning about, because it is very evident that there is an issue. And the main problem is that there are, and this is going to speak towards investments for a moment, but it really hits on all aspects of financial planning. But the returns that are available in the marketplace in various ways of obtaining it through portfolio, asset allocation portfolio and investments, just even buying just stocks and bonds directly, investors tend to have a much, much lower rate of return. And Dalbar is a company that does studies on this very specifically and has found roughly the estimated amount, and it moves about over time. The average investor is eking out about 3%, while there is about a 7% differential in market returns. And even on the downside, right? So like when markets are bad, investors are losing a lot more than what the market is producing. And then when markets are good, they're earning a whole lot less. The question is why? And the answers are found, we believe, within the behavior and all of the cognitive biases and heuristics that are utilized by individuals. And, so financial planning is a process and a structure that allows us to kind of sit with those biases and chew them over and try to actually get to rational decision making as opposed to emotional decision making, just because of the fact that there's so much chaos, there's so much that we don't know and that we can't process as individual investors. So financial processing will slow it down and give us systems to work with.
Let me ask here, from the perspective of someone who maybe is a jiu-jitsu gym owner and they're looking at something like this for the first time, they're probably going to be thinking, well, what is financial planning anyway? What exactly does it do and why do I need it? And they might hear this and think, this guy's talking about investments. I don't care about investments. I just want to get students in the door. And I think that, again, maybe that touches onto some of the biases that you alluded to and a failure to look at the bigger perspective. But how do you address that? From a the perspective of a jiu-jitsu business person, how would you kind of give them an intro in terms of what financial planning really is, why they need it, and kind of how it fits into this broader system of financial vehicles that people can use to grow their wealth?
It's a good question. I'll take a stab at it. We all build businesses in which we love, hopefully, and certainly that would be indicative of the gym owner, a jiu-jitsu gym owner for sure. They're going to hang their hat and create their livelihood from it. But obviously, I would say financial planning is kind of like a secular philosophy of embracing total responsibility. And so, again, I think martial artists can tap into that easier than the average person, this idea of total responsibility. And so the business owner, the gym owner, is looking at this vehicle of earning power. But we need to diversify ourselves outside of that earning power over time, just because of the reality of life and this idea that we may not be able to do this for the rest of our lives, or we may not want to do it, or at least we want to have options, right? So financial planning is taking one's earning power and then optimizing it and positioning it in such a way that gives them the most flexibility. Because at the end of the day, I think many people have expressed it as, I'm seeking freedom. I'm seeking confidence in the future about my financial freedom. And the only way that's going to be done for the gym owner, or any business owner for that matter, or any individual, even if they're employee W-2, they need to embrace financial planning. And it's important, as we kind of said earlier, that it is not about how much money you have to invest. If you're willing to practice and train, so to speak, then there are business models, one of which, RONIN Wealth, would adopt and advise people to embrace, that we just need to work within the advice set of financial planning and work on all the aspects that we can control, as opposed to no one can control tax legislation, no one can control interest rates that the Fed is doing, and so on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because most people who really love jiu-jitsu kind of make it their whole world. I'm very guilty of this, right? I think probably most of us are. Jiu-jitsu is intoxicating. It has this ability to draw you in. And a lot of people who do this full time really seem to have very little interest in other things. And so when you say something like a jiu-jitsu business person should think about diversification, that might kind of raise some eyebrows from jiu-jitsu business people, because they will often say, well, look, I don't want to be a corporate investor. The only thing I want to do is jiu-jitsu. That's the love of my life. I love the sport. It's how I make my money. The gym's doing well right now. It's been growing. Why should I do all of this stuff? But you brought up a great point about diversification. I mean, a very timely example right now. We just came out of a once in a century pandemic. And then after that, interest rates have exploded, right? Both of these things are not good news for you if you are a jiu-jitsu business owner. If an event happens that's outside of your control, where all of a sudden a whole bunch of your students leave, and that will happen. I mean, I think we can establish that over the past few years, there's been ample evidence that sometimes chaos in the world can trickle down to your small business. That's the situation where financial planning really makes a difference, right? Because, I mean, if inflation is raising prices of everything, and now the dollars that you're bringing in at the gym are not worth as much as they used to be, and you got to think about raising rates for your students, or people are losing their jobs, so they're quitting your gym. If you've got something else going on, another revenue stream, especially a revenue stream that kind of runs contrary to your main business, you can kind of hedge, right? You can make sure that you've still got a backup, some other option going on there. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that, about the importance of diversification and why going all in on your gym and having all of your eggs in that basket can be risky over the long term.
Yeah, definitely. And you bring up a good point. It's talking about diversification, typically we're talking about diversifying our investments and not putting all your eggs in one basket and having different asset class representation, which is absolutely essential and important. And there's a time for that. But really what you and I are talking about now, specifically, like say for the gym owner, we're talking about diversifying the earnings and the cash flow of the business. And because at the end of the day, like if we're looking at retirement, if we just say retirement, also, I know that might lose people, but the idea behind it is actually so that you can replace yourself, right? And so as a business owner, we're always looking to systematize our businesses such that it doesn't rely solely on us, because we are mortal. Things can happen to us. And so this is the idea of diversification, whether it's going to be a going concern and we're putting in systems in order for our gym to continue without us, which I think is probably a type of succession planning that is probably overlooked or so far out that individuals do not pay attention to it when they should be embracing it from the very, very beginning, especially if they want to monetize the student base and the culture that they've created and the geographical value that it currently has, right? Because at the end of the day, the gym owner has, put their stake in the ground in a geographical area, and us consumers of jiu-jitsu exist in that local area. So there's value just in that alone, right? So the succession planning and thought processes of trying to ward off all these threats, that's why I say it's like financial planning, right? It really is, and it's also like jiu-jitsu in the fact that we have to look at and systematize the chaos. My coach has said that, and I stole it from him. I'm sure he stole it from others, but that's what we're trying to do. And so when we're looking at that cash flow, maybe we're putting it into accounts for our future that are efficient, maybe from a tax perspective, maybe from an investment return perspective, but it's not just pouring all of our assets and our cash flow back into new mats necessarily. It can be, definitely, but we have to look at cash flow management. That's obviously something that we work with our gym owners that we do have under RONIN Wealth and things of that nature. So it's really diversifying the cash flow and not just having it in cash and consumption use on deck for consumption, and then just cash in the business for reinvestment of new equipment or whatever the case may be. Does that make a little bit of sense?
Absolutely. And the interesting thing about jiu-jitsu is if we want to talk about retirement, again, so many people in jiu-jitsu, the last thing they want to think about is retirement, because if they love the sport, their thought is usually, I want to do this till the day I die. And that's admirable, but there are going to be a lot of milestones and problems and obstacles that come up that will prevent you from being that on-the-ground instructor this whole time. And so, although I think a lot of gym owners, they think of it almost like a little solar system that revolves around them, and, they're the main instructor and it's very top-down. Like you said, the problem with that is if you build a company that is entirely based around you as a person, you are now a single point of failure. And compare jiu-jitsu to a white collar job, right? If you're, a financial planner, for example, you can do that job until the day you die, right? You can be a 70-year-old financial planner and still keep going. These people exist. In jiu-jitsu, being a day-to-day instructor is going to be something that you are not able to do for that long. And I think people in jiu-jitsu need to think of their retirement age much differently from people who work a more traditional job. Retirement in jiu-jitsu might not mean I never do this anymore. But what it might mean is I no longer have the ability for one reason or another to be the day-to-day instructor. When you're 55 years old and you got a bad hip, do you really want to be the guy who's testing out all of those giant white belts who want to come in and smash, right? Probably not. So even if you're still on the mats doing your thing and having fun, there will come several times when you need to sort of semi-retire and step away from the action. And you got to plan for that. I think that most jiu-jitsu people don't do that. They don't realize that, look, all it takes is one bad accident, right? You get a knee to the head or something like that, and you could wind up in a situation where, maybe you're technically fine day to day, but you cannot train like you used to. You cannot be the on-the-ground instructor every day. And again, like you said, having a system where you can replace yourself is so key to making sure that your business doesn't just fall apart if something happens to you.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there's two angles there. There's the angle that affects the home front, right? If this gym owner, him or her, actually has a family that it's going to affect. It's possible that they're single and they only live for themselves, but that's probably in the minority. So any bad luck could affect the family finances immediately and also the gym itself, right? So the gym could lose its value quickly if these systems are not in place in advance, and it could also hit and that was going to have a direct correlation to the family. So we talked about that. There's insurance planning that can create coverage. There's other mechanisms that can protect the business that's paramount, right? That should be looked into. So I totally agree. That this is a vulnerability that we wouldn't want to have individuals susceptible to. But then from an offensive standpoint, I'm looking towards the idea that possibly the gym owner is having a long, wonderful career as they hoped for, but they should also, whenever that time comes, if they have the systems in place, then they have the option to monetize the business. Like I said, there's value. The students aren't going to just disappear once the lead instructor, the owner, is looking to pull back, right? But if there are not a thought process and a plan to start to move that business over into another generation, whether it's family or otherwise, then you're going to miss out on that valuation.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, it's interesting. You talked about offense and defense, and these are concepts that we talk about quite heavily in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But I think there's also this significant parallel, as you've established, to how you plan out your business. In the context of Jiu-Jitsu, I think we all know that you have to balance offense and defense. If you don't have any offense, then you really can't win. You need to be presenting some sort of offense in order to win. If you are fully, completely defensive, the best you can do is temporarily stave off defeat. So this sometimes leads people to lean very heavily on offense and think that it's more important. But the problem is that your offense will fail to the level of your defense. If you have giant gaping holes in your defense, then even if you've got incredible offense or you're a very aggressive, powerful grappler, you're still going to find yourself losing matches that you shouldn't lose, because some people, if they're very composed, they will weather your storm and they will find those openings and attack them. So we've talked about this many times on the podcast, the defense paradox, about how you want to be on the offense, but you need defense to go on the offense. And I think the same thing applies here when we're talking about how you structure your jiu-jitsu business. Offense, I guess the parallel would be, hey, I want to grow, I want to make money, I want to go out there and do amazing things. But defense is also important. How do I protect my business? How do I make sure that something terrible doesn't happen? How do I hedge against massive unexpected losses or other problems that could happen? And much like in jiu-jitsu, with your business, you don't want to neglect your defense. And you brought up a few things there. I think this is as good a time as any to get into some of those defensive concepts for your business. Insurance is a great one. I am not an expert in insurance, but I have a lot of friends who run gyms and they are constantly complaining about the landscape of insurance and what a challenge it is. Tell me your thoughts on insurance from a jiu-jitsu standpoint, how this kind of fits in, and what a financial planner like you would kind of do in terms of assessing this and helping people figure out that, again, they're not hemorrhaging money by playing defense and spending too much on things like insurance when they could be doing better.
Well, that's a great question, and I think it has to do, from a financial perspective, it has to do with, one, can we afford it, right? And so we're not going to even be able to, if we have this understanding that there is value in the defense and the insurance structure to protect us from bad luck, so to speak, can we even afford it? So we have to do cash flow management. We have to have clear data on what the gym and the total income is coming in from. Also, from that perspective, even maybe before insurance, is, well, something that's going to erode our wealth. You talked about inflation, but something that's right out of the gate is taxes. And so, it's important to look at tax mitigation, integrate that, and be very offensive, if you will, because it's an immediate threat. And business structures, gym owners are in a great position, because I think we all know that the big surprise out there, I guess you could say, is that the tax code is fundamentally built to benefit those who create value. And that would be businesses. So businesses have the opportunity to leverage the tax code to the nth degree and be as efficient as they can in order to mitigate taxes and tax strategies. After that, then we're having our surplus and we're looking at our cash flow, both offensive and defensively, and we're trying to identify what are the threats. I could be disabled, I could die prematurely, so on and so forth. There could be a pandemic, as we discussed. And so there could be business overhead coverage that can pay for the rent in such a time as well. This could be on top of maybe a so-called stimulus that may come our way or may not come our way, right? So once again, financial planning is embracing total responsibility. And if we get lucky through stimulus and if we're eligible, then so be it. But we're not planning for that. We're planning for carrying our own weight, if you will. And so I think about the tax mitigation, and I also think about the cash flow that is available to explore those premiums for those types of vulnerabilities on insurance. And another item that comes to mind is business entity structure. Different business entities can utilize different aspects of the code and depending on one's goals and what they're trying to achieve with their gym. So we talk a lot about business entity structure within tax mitigation and trying to utilize that as best as possible along with insurance. So all of that blends really, really well. And, and I might say here, and maybe we'll talk about it a little bit later, but within RONIN Wealth, we have a system that we work with called Kaizen Wealth Ranking System. And this is at a high level is basically, utilizing our ranking system in jiu-jitsu community and having those parallels and at least that vision of understanding to explore all the facets of financial planning from white to black, and if we conceptualize white belt, I think we all can agree that the main skill set there is survival. It's no wonder, right? We must survive. And this can be tailored to our financial lives. And so, and as we go, maybe we're talking blue belt is at a high level being proficient in escaping bad positions. So once we understand that we can survive pandemics, we could survive disability potentially if we've planned for it, we could survive premature death, meaning that our families are covered and our students can have a succession plan in place so that the community can continue to thrive. And maybe the family member who's left behind can monetize the business, right? They may not necessarily be a black belt spouse that can just take over. So I think of the blue belt, a ranking system at a high level as looking at how we can escape different areas. And there's many, many financial concepts and facets that we basically need to explore and check off, get educated on it, and see what is appropriate to install and implement into one's specific situation. And I can go on about purple, brown, and black, but it's really those higher belts are really a matter of, I think we characterize purple belt as really being proficient with the guard and understanding how to fight off your back. I mean, that's the essence of jiu-jitsu. It's one of the distinguishing characteristics. And so fighting off our back may be looking for opportunities in a situation we're not in the best position, and yet we can still be very successful. And I think that's the next layer of facet. It's the structure and framing. Let's talk about that maybe for a second. A purple belt's bottom guard game is going to be really, really proficient when they have good structure and framing, for sure. And that structure and framing may flow into the financial world and mindset of, do I have the infrastructure set up to start disseminating my surplus? I don't even know if I have surplus if I've never started and trained within financial planning, so to speak, but we're starting to get an understanding of the lifestyle relative to the actual earning power. And then that the excess cash can go into various strategic accounts, from retirement to taxable accounts, to real estate, whatever the case may be. Your brown belt knows how to fight from an advantageous standpoint, right? So now that our wealth is growing, we need to seek opportunities and start to fine tune. And then obviously the black belt position is just really at brown belt, we're max funding accounts. We're paying ourselves first in all areas. We're mitigating taxes and paying attention to every single aspect. And then the black belt just simply sees opportunity everywhere. Where one's emergency fund, and we haven't talked about that, the concept of an emergency fund, but we're probably familiar with it. For a black belt, or for a lower rank, the emergency fund is not fun. It's low yielding and it's on deck. Oftentimes it's tempting to go buy a car with your emergency fund because things are going well. But even having an emergency fund oftentimes is not available to individuals without planning. But then after we have it, what we find is that it's just a low yielding account and we start looking for excuses to utilizing it. But typically level one is I'm going to use it in consumption levels or buying depreciating assets, as opposed to continuing on this path towards wealth accumulation. But the black belt can use an emergency fund, and this is what I kind of conceive of, is it becomes an opportunity fund. Yes, it's there to keep us shielded from selling our appreciating assets at inopportune times. But also now I may drive by and find a piece of property that I've always wanted, that it's a fire sale. I can tap directly into my emergency fund and use it as an opportunity fund. That's an example that comes to mind where your mindset really, really starts to change once you're actually training and working through your financial plan on a continuous basis.
That's a really cool parallel that you bring up between the progression through jiu-jitsu and the progression through financial security and wealth achievement. I never thought of it that way, but you're right. At white belt, I mean, the language you're using reminds me very much of the language that Saulo Ribeiro used in his book, Jiu-Jitsu University, where he categorizes the main purpose of each of the belts. And he agrees with you that at white belt, your goal is survival. And that's kind of your foundation. I mean, yes, there's a lot of cool sweeps and submissions and fancy ways to go on the offense in jiu-jitsu, but none of that is achievable unless you've got a foundation that is predictable, where you can survive, where you know you can at least take care of yourself. And that's an interesting way to think of wealth management as well, where at the bare minimum, you need to be able to survive. But then at some point, as you grow and accumulate, you can start looking for opportunities and investment potential and ways to expand and to grow. That's a really cool parallel in the ladder that I never thought of.
Yeah, I think so, and it's intended to, the thought is it's going to be somewhat fun, but it's a real serious lens to explore all the facets of financial planning. Now, as we have this common ground and understanding and its value, that it actually is a wonderful system. It may not be perfect, but it's a wonderful system to track our progress and to evaluate and hold ourselves accountable. There is correlation with the proficiency of higher ranks over lower ranks.
Now, one other thing I wanted to expand on here, you talked about things like tax mitigation, entity formation, organizational structure, ownership. I want to expand on that a bit because, look, as a business, people are often focused on growth. How can I bring in more customers, make more money? But bringing in more revenue is not the same as making more money. Look, you see this all the time, right? In the public market. Look at tech companies. It's possible to bring in a lot of revenue and still be losing money hand over fist. And so sometimes the most efficient way for you to increase your profit at any given time, it might not be to bring in more money. It might be to optimize what you've already got. And I'd love to pick your brain on this. I mean, on the topic of tax mitigation, I think what happens with a lot of businesses is they just kind of get started quick and dirty. And look, I always advocate for that. People who listen to this podcast know that I like to think agile, and I encourage people just get started, get out there. But the challenge is, sometimes when you're talking about a business, those decisions that you fail to make at the beginning because you just wanted to get started, they can really come back to bite you in the end. I mean, I've seen people who got started just by making stuff, putting stuff out there, and then it started making money, and they never really put thought into things like taxation. And then they realized at some point, because they weren't thinking about that, they wound up just getting thrown into a default bucket or getting thrown into the least optimal bucket. And they were paying like 35% in taxes, whereas with some very small changes, they could get that number down to like 15%. Now, of course, these numbers are going to change a lot, but I mean, think of that difference, right? Going from giving 35% of your money to the government down to giving 15%. I mean, how much growth of your business would it take to have a profit leap like that? So sometimes little things can make a huge difference in terms of how you keep more of your money rather than giving it away. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I mean, of course, you're American and this varies from country to country. I'm in Canada here, but a lot of the core concepts are going to be the same regardless of where you live. So I'd love to get your thoughts on tax mitigation and maybe some of the common mistakes people make when it comes to setting up their entities.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that is an important aspect to look at, most definitely. I mean, we've integrated purposefully our tax planning firm to serve our financial planning firm for sure because of its importance. But I've always kind of been looking at this problem as, when we're looking at investments, we talk about bear markets and maybe what the definition might be, 2 down quarters or 20% decreases in the market. And then we're definitionally at some, I know definitions change, but, we get to a definition where we are solidly in a bear market, right? And that comes periodically over time through our investments. But how about taxes? As you mentioned, if it's in excess of 20%, it's almost as if there's a bear market on our earning power every single year, right out of the gate. It's definitely going to happen. And so we have to be mindful of that. And so I think that's a very important component, that even if you have started and got the ball rolling and you're deep into the game, I think that most of the time the upside there is you're going to be pleasantly surprised with a little bit of planning, because if you're deep in the game and you have good earning power and you're maybe at the higher tax brackets, it can be saddening, right? When we're bringing in new students, we're bringing in new revenue, and yet a good portion of that revenue is getting evaporated because of the tax inefficiency. And again, it comes back towards, do we have the best business structure in place? Are we positioning our assets in favorable accounts that synergize with tax reduction? It could be oftentimes found in retirement plans as step one, but there are definitely other areas as well. So all of those start to get integrated, from your retirement plans to your business structure and to the actual planning processes of your taxes, as opposed to just, getting all your taxes and all your numbers and giving it over to the CPA and just say, please file it as ASAP, right? There's also this notion of refunds, right? We've always seen in the business, I think, and maybe even the laity out there have seen that people oftentimes can get adjusted and accustomed to refunds. And, we've been in a low interest rate environment for 15 years prior to the pandemic or so. And so we've just given up potentially. But we wake up a couple of years after inflation took off and the Federal Reserve has raised rates to 5.25. Well, now, letting the government borrow your money just to give it back in a large refund 12 months later is very imprudent, right? With the better rates of return that we can get on our cash. So again, it just becomes a spider web of drag on our wealth if we're not paying attention to it.
That is another really interesting thing about the psychology of money and the biases that we carry. Talking about tax refunds, I think most people are guilty of this. They look at the tax refund as something that they're getting from the government. Like, hey, it's a bonus. It's the end of the year. I did my taxes. The government's giving me some money. No. The government took more money from you than they were supposed to. And after sitting on it for potentially up to a year, now you're doing work to get it back. This is not free money that the government is giving you. This is money that was taken from you that you're clawing back. And I think that's important to understand, because people sometimes look at that tax refund is like a bonus. Like, great, I got an extra $1,000 back. I'm just going to go spend it. Well, you're kind of eating into what should have been your savings and your profit if you did that, if you just go and blow that money on something because you looked at it as a bonus. So I think that's a powerful argument about the psychology of money and how sometimes our own biases get in our way when it comes to making good decisions, both on and off the mats.
No, that's exactly right. And once again, that blends right into the major problem that we have in building wealth, is that we have these behavioral gaps and these biases, cognitive biases and heuristics. And it's wonderful that a lot of good work has been done in financial science now to educate us on that and to create solutions and strategies to mitigate those behavioral biases. But once again, it all sounds quite nerdy. It's really over a lot of people's head, but it boils down to, if you can understand this idea of the values in which we stand on as martial artists and how we can build upon that, I think that it just lends really, really well to embracing this total responsibility that I'm talking about and engaging in financial planning and trying to develop one's skill set through exposure. When I started jiu-jitsu, I knew nothing, obviously, and deep along the road now, it's an endless growth rate, right? And that's part of the attraction, is the game continues to evolve and really honing. We're never going to be really at the level that we want to be. So it's a continuous journey of trying to refine, and we owe it to ourselves and our families, I think, and to our businesses.
Now, on the topic of taking care of ourselves and our families, something that you said to me before we hit the record button was the importance of paying ourselves first. This is very powerful advice. There's actually an awesome book on this. You've probably heard of it. I've certainly seen it recommended by business folks all the time, and I've read it myself, called Profit First. So this is not a novel mindset necessarily, but it's a mindset where once you adopt it, it really changes the way that you operate your business. Tell me a little bit about what you mean about this when you talk about paying yourself first. What does that look like, and where do people tend to screw this up?
Oh, goodness. Yes, it goes in many directions, and it may even start with an exploration and an understanding of what money really is and what it represents, right? Certainly not the love of money, but rather just kind of respecting what it symbolizes. And, when we talk about maybe the scarcest asset that we have as humans is time on earth. We have to take a step back and look at the fact that we go to our work, hopefully our vocations and where we're inspired. And if not, we try to make adjustments over time with career advancement and such. But we trade our time for money. And that can be a fine thing whenever we're looking at what it actually represents. And it represents the value that we're giving to society, right? And we call money a medium of exchange, and sure it is. But yet, while we are building and preserving it, the reasons we're doing that, and the reasons, as you stated, we're trying to, at the very least, maybe maintain our purchasing power, is because this is time we traded, the scarcest asset and the most valuable component, arguably, that we have for this delayed gratification behavior. So money basically represents our value. Once we have this understanding, at least an introduction to the fact that money represents our value that we're imparting to society, we can then better understand that that value is first and foremost prioritized within our immediate nucleus, our family, our business, our students. And so we need to maybe have this mindset of where we are stowing this money, this value, first and foremost for us, so that we can optimize that delayed gratification. Otherwise, if we're not paying ourselves first and we are more entrapped with a cycle of consumption, then all of the other rules of the world will create unnecessary drag, such as if we're all about consumption, then that value is going to be wasted with all the friction that we find and with tax law, debasement of our dollar, right? All of this are other aspects in hedging ourselves and looking at trying to find areas where we're paying ourselves first, and secondarily, we have taken on the leverage that we can actually afford and paying our creditors second.
I mean, I guess all of that is to say, that's an argument to have a financial planner in your corner. I think a lot of jiu-jitsu people, if they look at finance like they look at things like technology, I think they're probably a little bit afraid of it. I can tell you this as someone who runs a remotely recorded jiu-jitsu podcast. It's so funny to me because sometimes I'll be talking to jiu-jitsu people who are just completely fearless when it comes to jiu-jitsu. Like they will go out there and they will compete in front of 10,000 people, and that's just their lives. But just the idea of working with a computer or setting up a microphone just kills them because it's like they don't have any patience for it. They don't have any interest in it. I think there's almost a phobia of it. And I would guess there's probably a similar thing with finance, where it seems like this big, scary, complicated idea and people just don't want to touch it. They just want to do jiu-jitsu and they don't want to think about the finances. But like we talked about here today, that's a mistake where you might look back on what you did and realize, man, if I just made some better tax decisions 10 years ago, I would be so much better off. And it would have only taken me an hour to do it. I think if that describes you, the kind of person who just wants to do jiu-jitsu and doesn't want to think too much about their finances, I think that's probably the strongest argument for a financial planner that you can make in the sport. With that said, though, David, I'll turn it over to you. Any closing thoughts or last things you wanted to talk about, which we didn't get to here today in our chat?
No, I really appreciate the time. It's been fun, and I appreciate the invitation. I would encourage people to look into it. For sure. It's not, we don't have to go super deep into it, right? It's just really this idea of if you value a coach, that's nothing more than what a financial planner can be for an individual. And I think it's extremely important for us to have coaches in the areas that we value. And I think, as you stated too, if we're not giving any thoughts to this is a game in which we don't have a choice to play. We are going to play it. So we might as well get good at it.
Absolutely, absolutely. One thing that really altered my view on money management was the realization that there's very much this Red Queen effect when it comes to your finances. Reference to Alice in Wonderland, but the idea that, look, sometimes you have to move and you have to run just to stay in the same space. If you stay still and do nothing, you're already losing when it comes to money. Just inflation and other factors are going to eat you alive. So ignoring this problem does not make it go away. It's something that you need to aggressively attack. And I think another issue that a lot of people will have when they think of financial planning is they're going to assume that they're not the right target audience for a financial planner, either because they assume I've got to have millions in the bank to make this worthwhile, or they might assume this is going to cost me an arm and a leg to afford a financial planner. And my understanding is that that isn't always the case. I think you've actually customized some solutions for this. So as we tie this up, David, I think that's as good a time as any to replug the stuff. Talk about your work, talk about Kaizen, talk about RONIN, and how this fits in both for people who are jiu-jitsu professionals and maybe people who are more casual, but might still be looking for some financial planning assistance.
Definitely. And that's what I'm hanging my hat on, is I honestly think there's a better way to do it. The industry is working towards having a better solution for society. But at this time, it still is heavily skewed towards wanting to work with multimillionaires, right? And great. If you have a lot of money, I think we're well versed in discussing that, right? But really where I think the most power centers in on is financial planning and leading with advice. So RONIN Wealth is definitely can do asset management, but first and foremost, we're leading with advice and a financial planning engagement for the jiu-jitsu community. And that is going to be kind of like where we're able to ground ourselves in the approach and wanting to grow with our clients. We also created the financial planning engagement such that it's an all-in-one wealth planning engagement. And basically what we're looking at is all the facets of financial planning, which it also includes, and very importantly includes, tax planning, tax preparation, and filing. Individuals don't need to do all of that. They just need, if they're wanting to work with RONIN, we are mandating, the prime directive, if you will, is to embrace financial planning. If they're doing their taxes elsewhere, even if they're doing their investments and their money management, the financial planning gives us the space to not be salivating over one's assets that they can bring to one's firm. We have the capability to do that, but if an individual wants to look at their own, manage their own with guidance from an unbiased financial planning perspective, that's what we think is basically the holy grail, if I could use that. And then we also are giving a structure such that digital real-time data and organization is available through our technology. So our clients get their own client website dashboard. We talked a little bit about investments, that it's there if we'd like. We have goals-based investments called Kaizen portfolio strategies, where it allows us to avoid emotion-driven investing and actually leverage professional portfolio structures so that we can have proper diversification and rebalancing and structures of that nature. And then lastly, we're going to be working through our Kaizen wealth ranking system. And that allows us to explore everything and actually hold ourselves accountable and track our progress. So we're pretty excited about it. We think we've made a offer that is going to be very attractive to the community, and you definitely don't have to have a ton of money. In fact, it's a very, very prime solution for those who don't and are looking to do all the right things from the beginning.
Amazing, man. Well, if people want to contact you to get in touch, either to ask questions, get advice, or to work with you, how do they go about doing that?
Sure. They can go directly to the website, roninwealth.com. Also, might mention my traditional practice is kwealthplan.com, and you'll find me there.
Amazing. Well, thank you, David. I will put links to that in the show notes to make it easy for people to find you. So if you are like me and you have the memory of a goldfish and you've already forgotten those URLs, just go to your podcast player, go to notes or description or whatever it's called, and you'll find some links you can just tap to get in touch with David. I'll also put a link to all of my stuff. Everything we make lives at bjjmentalmodels.com. We've got, over 300 hours of free educational content on there. It's got to be the biggest library of its kind when it comes to audio jiu-jitsu resources in the world. All of that, again, is completely free. It's all intended to be entirely educational. Not a lot of just shop talk here at BJJ Mental Models. We always focus on delivering value and making things educational. Our newsletter is also closing in on 12,000 subscribers. It's completely free. Tons of awesome thought pieces and freebies to get posted there. You can also sign up there from the website. And of course, if all of this sounds good, I always ask that people consider joining BJJ Mental Models Premium. It's how we pay the bills. It's how we fund everything that we do. It's how you can support us. And it's also the best way for us to support you as well. For those who don't know, we've, for the purpose of making things flexible and convenient for everyone and making sure that we can accommodate everyone, we've got 3 different tiers. The BJJ Mental Models Premium Standard tier, that's where you're going to get access to our entire library of jiu-jitsu audio courses on strategy, tactics, concepts, mindset. We don't do a lot of technique breakdown. I feel like that's a problem that's already been solved by many other people. But if you want to change the way that you think about jiu-jitsu, this is the best library for you to do that. You also get access to some amazing ongoing premium podcasts that you can only get as a BJJ Mental Models premium subscriber. If you're a fan of Emily Kwok or Joe Hannon or Drew Foster, that's where you go to get those podcasts, and we've got more coming as well. The next tier that we've got is our coaching tier. That's where you'll get direct coaching from our black belt review team. Some amazing competitors there. I mean, if you watched ADCC and CJI this year, you're probably going to find a lot of familiar names on our review team. So that's the kind of caliber of people that we have doing reviews for us. The way it works is send us a video of yourself rolling or your competition footage. You're going to get the kind of attentive, detailed breakdown that simply cannot be delivered reasonably in a gym by your instructor. It's an incredible training supplement. And beyond that, we're also expanding our pro services. We've been thinking a lot recently, as probably evidenced by this episode, about how we can help people build careers in jiu-jitsu. So if you need business support, if you want the power of our engine behind you, if you want advice on marketing, product, or any other consultation, or just general assistance growing your business, check out our pro tier as well. All of those details are on bjjmentalmodels.com, and I will put a link in the show notes. David, thanks so much for coming by. This was a very unique episode. Like I said, I think there's going to be a lot of people who think, hey, this doesn't teach me how to do jiu-jitsu better, but part of my job here is to give people educational material that might not be what they want, but it's ultimately what they need. And a recurring theme that I'm hearing from people, especially over the last few years, is they need help building and securing and making their business survivable. And that information is not always readily attainable, at least not in the context of jiu-jitsu. So I'm hoping that for the people out there who either do this professionally or are interested in doing so, I think this is kind of a one-of-a-kind info packet that we've made. I'm not aware of anyone else who's made something like this. So thanks so much for coming by and sharing this information with the audience.
Absolutely, Steve. Thanks so much. Love your work.
You too, sir. Thank you very much. And thank you to the listeners as always. I really do appreciate everyone hanging out with us here every week. We'll talk to you next time. Take care and see you soon.